Hello everyone, my name is Emma, and I work as an editor at a big publishing company in the city. I make about $70,000 a year and have always been financially independent. Life has always been busy for me, trying to meet deadlines while also finding time for myself. Maybe that's why I never really got into dating. I enjoyed spending time alone, whether it was with a good book or taking a quiet walk in the park near my apartment. But everything changed one sunny Sunday that seemed like any other. I was deep into a podcast, walking along without a care in the world. The park was full of people, kids running around and pets playing. I must have lost track of where I was walking because the next thing I knew, a guy on a bicycle almost ran into me. "Watch out!" he shouted, swerving at the last second. His voice was sharp, and I could tell he was annoyed. "I'm so sorry," I said quickly, pulling out one of my earbuds. I hadn't realized I'd wandered onto the bike path. He stopped his bike and turned around, now looking more amused than angry. "You've got to watch where you're going. This path can be a jungle sometimes." "Yeah, my bad. Totally my fault," I admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed. I brushed a stray strand of hair from my face and gave him a shy smile. He laughed, and just like that, the tension was gone. "I'm Ryan," he said, extending his hand. "Emma," I replied, shaking his hand. His handshake was firm and confident. "So, Emma, are you always this distracted, or is it just my charming presence?" he said with a playful grin that made me laugh. "Just a long week at work. My brain is already in weekend mode," I said. "Fair enough. I was just about to grab a coffee at that cafe over there." He pointed to a small place at the edge of the park. "Care to join me? You know, as a peace offering for almost running me over." I thought about it for a moment. He seemed nice, and honestly, I was curious. Sure, I could use a coffee. Why not? It might even make for a good story, I said as we walked to the cafe. Ryan was easy to talk to. He told me about his job at a car sales company, earning around $45,000 a year, and how he liked spending his weekends biking or hanging out with friends. He wasn't from the city and had moved here because he thought it offered more opportunities. "Big city dreams and all that," he said with a smirk. I shared a bit about my job too, explaining how I loved books and turned that passion into a career that paid $70,000 a year. "It's better than being stuck in a cubicle doing something you hate," I added. We reached the cafe and ordered our coffees. While we waited, I realized how comfortable I felt around him. It was strange because I'm usually a bit reserved around new people, but with Ryan, the conversation just flowed. After meeting Ryan, we started hanging out more. He was funny and easygoing, but it wasn't long before I started noticing little things that bothered me. At first, it was nothing major, just small comments here and there that made me raise an eyebrow. One Sunday, we went out for dinner, and somehow the topic of careers and family came up. We were just chatting about work and life. Nothing serious, or so I thought. "So, how's the book world treating you?" Ryan asked, taking a sip of his beer. "Busy as always. Deadlines don't stop for anyone," I replied, poking at my salad. "Yeah, I get that, but you wouldn't want to be stuck in that forever, right? I mean, eventually you'd want to settle down, maybe cut back on work hours," Ryan said casually. I paused, my fork midair. "Not really, Ryan. I love what I do. I don't see myself giving it up anytime soon, or ever really." Ryan shrugged. "Sure, but what about when we have kids? Wouldn't you want to be around more?" The question caught me off guard. "We?" I chuckled nervously. "That's jumping way ahead, don't you think?" He laughed it off. "Yeah, you're right. Just thinking out loud, I guess." I tried to shake off the discomfort, but it lingered. A few weeks later, Ryan invited me to have dinner with his parents. I figured it was a good sign. Things were getting serious and all. I was nervous but hopeful. That dinner, though, opened my eyes a bit more. His parents lived in a cozy, well-kept house in the suburbs. His mom, Mrs. Parker, was all smiles when we arrived. "Emma, so lovely to finally meet you. Ryan has told us so much about you," she gushed, pulling me into a hug. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Parker. It's great to meet you too," I managed to reply with a smile. Dinner was going well until Mrs. Parker started talking about family and marriage. You know, Ryan was always the responsible one, she said, serving herself more potatoes. We've always told him how important it is to find a good girl who knows how to take care of a home. Ryan's dad nodded in agreement. Absolutely. It's about building a strong foundation. A man needs to provide and a woman, well, she takes care of the home. I glanced at Ryan, hoping he'd say something, but he just focused on his food. Mrs. Parker continued, "That's how we raised our boys. Family first, right, Ryan?" "Right, Mom," Ryan finally said, looking up. His agreement felt like a punch to the gut. I tried to stay calm. It's interesting because I've always been very focused on my career. I love my job and believe in contributing equally. Mrs. Parker smiled, but it felt forced. Of course, dear, but you'll see. Priorities change when you have children. It's only natural for a woman to want to stay at home with her babies. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We left shortly after dinner, and the drive home was tense. I broke the silence. Your mom has some strong opinions about family roles. Do you feel the same way? He hesitated, then said, I think there's some truth to it. It worked for my parents. Despite the uneasy dinner, our relationship continued. Somehow, the good times seemed to outweigh the bad, and I found myself agreeing to marry him. Looking back, love must have blinded me because those warning signs were still there, lurking in the back of my mind. The wedding planning began, and it was all a whirlwind. Ryan wanted something simple, and so did I. We decided on a modest ceremony with just close family and friends. But as the day approached, the real pressure started to build. Not about the event, but about what our lives would be like afterward. After the ceremony, at the reception, Ryan's mom pulled me aside. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were serious. Emma dear, I'm so happy for you both. Remember, a good wife supports her husband no matter what. Thank you, Mrs. Parker. I intend to be a supportive partner, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. And remember, dear, when the babies start coming, it's best if you're at home. You can't trust strangers to raise your children, she added. Her words felt like a warning, and the finality in her tone made my stomach turn. Later, when Ryan and I were alone, I said, Your mom talked to me about kids and me not working. I watched his reaction closely. Yeah, she's just looking out for the future. She means well, Emma. You know how moms are. Ryan brushed it off, taking a sip of his champagne. But you know I'm not planning to quit my job, right? Even when we have kids. I said, needing him to understand. Ryan paused, his face serious. We'll see, Em. Things change. We'll do what's best for our family. After our wedding, Ryan suggested we move to a larger apartment closer to his work at the car sales company. The place was nice, bigger than our old one, but it was right next door to his parents' house. I had my doubts about why he chose this particular spot, but I agreed, hoping for the best. The rent was $1,800 per month, a bit high but manageable with our combined $115,000 income. Once we settled in, the reality of our new life together began to show. Ryan started bringing up his idea of a traditional family more often, where he would be the breadwinner and I would handle the household, and eventually the kids. One evening, we sat down with our finances spread across the dining table, a mess of bills and budgets under the dim light. I tried to show him how keeping both our jobs was better, especially with the economy being unstable. Our combined income allowed us to save about $10,000 a year after accounting for rent, bills, and living expenses. Look at these numbers, Ryan. With both incomes, we're not just getting by, we're actually saving. It doesn't make sense for me to quit my job, I said, pointing at the spreadsheet showing our $10,000 yearly savings. Ryan shook his head, pushing the papers away slightly. It's not just about the money, Em. It's about having a real family life. You know, like my parents had. I sighed, feeling frustrated. But it's not the past, Ryan. Things are different now. We both need to contribute. He didn't seem convinced, and the discussion ended with a heavy silence. The situation got more complicated with his mother, Mrs. Parker, living so close. She dropped by often unannounced, each visit with a new critique about how I was managing our home. One afternoon, I was sorting through some work emails when she came in without a greeting and started inspecting the house, wiping her finger along the bookshelf, looking for dust. "Emma, you really should focus more on keeping a cleaner house. A dusty home is not a healthy home," she said, her tone sharp. I clenched my teeth, trying to stay calm. "I cleaned yesterday, Mrs. Parker, and I work full-time. It's just a little dust." "That's just it, you work too much. If you were home more, maybe things wouldn't slip through," she countered, walking over to the linen closet. She pulled out a sheet, checking for any signs of improper laundering. I followed her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, trying to keep my cool. "I manage my time just fine, Mrs. Parker. Ryan and I are both happy with how things are," I said. She shook her head and moved to the kitchen to check the contents of our fridge. A woman's place is taking care of her home and husband. All these modern ideas about women needing careers are nonsense. Every comment stung, and I felt my defenses rising. "Maybe that worked for you, but I'm not you. I'm not going to quit my job and become someone I'm not." When Ryan came home that evening, I tried to explain how suffocating his mother's visits were becoming. He listened, but his response chilled me. "Mom's just trying to help, Emma. She has a lot of experience running a home. But it's our home, not hers. I need you to stand up for me, for us," I pleaded. Ryan looked torn but finally said, "She's my mom, Emma. She means well. We should at least consider her advice." The argument that night was long and painful. We went to bed angry, the first of many silent nights. As the days turned into weeks, I felt more like an outsider in my own home, constantly judged and found wanting. The pressure to conform to an outdated idea of a wife was relentless, and my resolve to maintain my independence was tested every day. As the months passed, Ryan's complaints about me not doing enough at home started to increase. He would come home from work, look around with a scowl, and comment on the dusty shelves or the dinner that was either too bland or overcooked because I had rushed it after a long day at the publishing house. His favorite phrase became, "If you can't manage both, maybe you shouldn't be working." One evening, after a particularly harsh critique of some slightly undercooked pasta, Ryan let it drop. "Emma, I'm serious. If you can't meet me halfway and take care of the house properly, maybe we should rethink this whole arrangement," he said, implying that divorce was on the table. I still loved Ryan, despite everything, and I didn't want our marriage to fail over this. So I made a decision that pained me deeply. The next day, I talked to my boss, Olivia, about quitting my job to become a full-time housewife. Olivia was shocked and tried to persuade me otherwise. "Emma, you're one of our best. Are you sure about this?" she asked, concern clear on her face. "I don't see any other way, Olivia. I have to try to make things work at home," I replied, feeling defeated. Olivia, always trying to find a solution, suggested a compromise. "What if you could work from home and manage your projects remotely? It's becoming more common now, and you wouldn't have to quit." The idea felt like a lifeline. I agreed to the arrangement, but decided not to tell Ryan. Instead, I told him I had resigned. He was overjoyed, thinking I had chosen our home life over my career. So I started my new life as a housewife, seeing Ryan off to work each morning and greeting him when he came home. But as soon as he left, I would power up my laptop and dive into my editing work. It was a strange double life, but it worked. The $4,000 monthly salary I earned from my remote job, I secretly saved in a separate bank account, just in case. Over 5 months, I saved $20,000, building a safety net for myself without Ryan's knowledge. However, living on just Ryan's $3,750 monthly salary was tougher than we thought, despite my best efforts to save money. 5 months later, we were struggling financially. I tried to bring up the topic gently. "Ryan, I think it might be necessary for me to go back to work. We're running through our savings too fast." Ryan's reaction was swift and angry. "That's because you're spending too much. You need to learn how to save properly," he snapped. I was stunned. I hadn't bought anything for myself in months, and always looked for the cheapest deals at the supermarket. His words hurt deeply, and I felt a mix of anger and humiliation. The next day, his mother came over with the intention of teaching me how to budget. She dragged me to the store and pointed out the cheapest, often lowest quality products. "Buy these, Emma. Stop wasting money on expensive stuff," she lectured as we walked down the aisles. Back home, she showed me how to dilute dish soap to make it last longer. "You use too much. You need to make do with less," she instructed in a patronizing tone. She even started checking my receipts, scolding me for any purchase she deemed unnecessary. "Why are you buying this? Just stick to basics," she would say, shaking her head in disapproval. Living like this was unbearable. Every day felt more suffocating than the last. I was losing my sense of self to their imposed austerity, living under constant scrutiny. The situation was becoming impossible to bear. I felt trapped in a life of pretend submission, with every part of me screaming for escape. But for now, I held on, biding my time and planning my next steps carefully. It all reached a boiling point one drizzly Friday evening. I was on the phone in the living room, pouring my heart out to my mom. "I just don't know how much more I can take, Mom. His mother is always here, teaching me how to stretch every dollar until it screams. I get it, we need to save, but this is too much." Mom's voice was full of concern and anger. "Emma, that's not normal. You need to talk to Ryan about setting boundaries. It's your home too, not just his or his mother's playground." I nodded, feeling a bit stronger with my mom's support. But just as I was starting to feel better, Ryan stormed in from the other room, his face red with anger. He must have heard me complaining. He snatched the phone right out of my hand. A wife shouldn't be complaining about her husband and mother-in-law like some street gossip. He snapped into the phone before hanging up. I was shocked, my hand shaking slightly. "Ryan, you can't just grab my phone and talk to my mom like that." "Oh, I can't. Maybe if you had some respect for us, I wouldn't have to," he retorted, his voice rising. I could see the veins in his neck bulging. "Ryan, listen to yourself. Can't you see this isn't healthy?" I pleaded, hoping to reach some part of him that remembered what love felt like. But he was beyond reason. "Healthy? My mom was right. I should never have married you," he spat, his words cutting deeper than I expected. "That's enough, Ryan. I'm your wife, not some puppet you and your mom can control." I shot back, my anger flaring. "Then act like it or leave," he shouted, his face inches from mine. I stared at him, disbelief and sadness warring inside me. "You want me to leave? At 6 a.m.? It's dark and pouring rain outside. If you don't like how things are, then yes, get out," he replied coldly, his eyes unyielding. I knew then that nothing I could say would change his mind or the situation. Shaking, I grabbed a few essentials, my laptop, some clothes, and my phone. When I reached for my purse, Ryan was quicker, snatching it away. "You think you're leaving with this? I earned this money, not you." "Fine, keep it," I said, my voice hollow. I couldn't believe this was happening. I called a taxi and waited by the door, my heart pounding. The taxi pulled up, and I stepped out into the cold night air, drenched by the rain. As I climbed into the car, a strange calm settled over me. I was doing this, I was leaving. Later, at the hotel, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I felt a mix of emotions. But amidst all the chaos, I felt a wave of relief. Despite everything, I hadn't quit my job, and my secret savings account, which Ryan didn't know about, was now my lifeline. As dawn broke, I got up, the weight of my decision heavy on my mind. Today was the day I would take control back. I had an appointment with a lawyer to talk about filing for divorce. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. The lawyer's office was a simple, unremarkable place, tucked between a row of old brick buildings. Inside, Mr. Baker, my lawyer, was a straightforward man who didn't waste any time. "Let's get down to business," he said as soon as I sat down. "You're here to file for divorce, correct?" "Yes," I confirmed, my voice steadier than I expected. "I can't go back to the way things were." Mr. Baker nodded seriously. "All right, I'll need all the details. Any joint accounts, property, anything that needs untangling." We spent the next hour going over everything. He explained the legal process, what I could expect, and what my rights were. He was thorough, making sure I understood each step before preparing the necessary documents. "You'll need to serve these to your husband," he instructed, as he handed me the envelope, sealed with a stamp that felt like the seal on my old life. With the divorce papers in hand, I went back to the apartment I had shared with Ryan. He was still asleep, probably exhausted from last night's argument. The apartment felt different as I packed my things. Each item I put away marked the end of another shared chapter. By the time I finished packing, Ryan was waking up. He wandered into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and clearly confused to see my bags piled by the door. "What's going on?" he mumbled, scratching his head. I didn't have much to say, just actions to take. Instead of answering, I handed him the envelope. "These are for you," I said, my voice calm despite the emotions swirling inside. Ryan tore open the envelope, a frown forming as he read the contents. "Divorce." He laughed, disbelief in his tone. "You think you can just walk out, and everything will be all right?" He looked up from the papers, his eyes cold. "Come back when you're ready to apologize, and maybe I'll consider taking you back. But remember, you'll have to listen to my mother from now on." The absurdity of his words almost made me laugh, but I held it back. "I'm not coming back, Ryan. We're done." As I walked out of that apartment, the air felt different, crisper, almost hopeful. I went straight to the new place I had rented just days before. It was small, costing $1,200 a month, but it was mine, a space where I could start fresh. Every step I took felt heavy, but it also felt right. A few weeks after moving in, I was back at the office, fully diving into the whirlwind of publishing deadlines and meetings with authors. Being around my colleagues again and feeling the familiar rush of an approaching deadline reignited a spark in me that I thought I had lost. Days at the office blended into weeks, and before I knew it, I was back in my groove, managing manuscripts and deadlines with a new sense of purpose. The challenges I had faced in my personal life had given me a fresh perspective, and it felt really good to be back. The familiar world of texts and typos was more comforting than I had imagined. During this time, I reconnected with old friends, people who knew me long before Ryan. We met for drinks after work and shared meals on weekends. Slowly, I started to feel more like myself than I had in years. The laughter and light-hearted teasing grounded me, and in their company, I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten. A few months into this new phase, I received an unexpected call from Ryan. His voice was awkward and tinged with desperation. "Hey, I got laid off. Things are pretty rough," he started, stumbling over his words. "I was thinking maybe you could help me out financially and, maybe we could start over, rebuild. I mean, if you apologize to me and my mom and show some commitment." His request hung in the air, audacious and somewhat insulting, given our history. "Ryan, you really think I'd come back to support you and your parents after you kicked me out? You're out of a job now, and suddenly all your high and mighty principles are gone." There was a pause. "So that's a no?" he asked, sounding smaller and deflated. "Ryan, I'm doing really well, and honestly, I'm enjoying my freedom too much to give it up again. I hope you find your way, but it won't be with me." My words were firm, sealing the end of our relationship. After hanging up, I felt a surge of empowerment. Ryan's ridiculous call had reaffirmed something important for me. I was truly free now.